Hi, everyone. Welcome to Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kan, founder of Being Patient. I'm excited to announce today we're going to talk about a topic a lot of us want to know more about, and that is fasting and how fasting impacts our health and especially our brain. So I'm pleased to announce today that we have Dr. Valter Longo with us. He is from the University of Southern California, but currently in Milan, Italy, joining us today. Welcome, Dr. Longo.
Thanks for having me.
So you are the creator of something called the fasting mimicking diet. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly that is?
Yes, the fasting mimicking diet really is the result of our decades of work looking into how we can improve longevity, and particularly how nutrition can improve longevity. And historically, the interventions have been chronic, meaning that you'll have to do something every day. And so the fasting mimicking diet, I think, is one of the first attempts to say, based on discoveries, well, can you do something once every month or every 3 months or every 6 months for just 5 days? And could that change long term the way the body is protected and the way the body regenerates and maybe what it looks like to be rejuvenation, actually becoming a little bit younger.
So the entire theory behind fasting is what? Why is it really to give our bodies a chance to reset, or what are the actual benefits?
I mean, historically, and this I started basically. Well, I first started doing dietary restriction in mice and humans, but then I moved back to E. coli, to bacteria and yeast. And the remarkable thing is, if you take a bacteria, and these were my findings in the early '90s, right? You take a bacteria or a yeast, what we used to make bread, and you starve it. You put it in water. They become long-lived and they become very resistant, right? So this is a very conserved response, right, to the starvation condition, and probably is very simple idea, which is if you are an organism and you find yourself starving all of a sudden, you have to go into a protective mode, try to survive as long as possible with as little food as possible until the food comes around again, right? So that's I think the major ideas behind fasting is that to break things down, well, to protect yourself, but then start breaking yourself down, right? So eat, something called autophagy, but also something called apoptosis. Lots of cells commit suicide, and lots of cells start eating themselves, right? It's very counterintuitive, but of course, it makes sense if you're trying to survive a period where there is no external food and you're relying on the internal resources to stay alive.
So I've had friends who have fasted, and one of the comments they have is like, "Oh, I feel like my mind is so clear after I fast." Why is that? And what does it mean in particular to our brain health?
Yes, we are starting to believe that fasting is potentially a true reset, meaning that it allows, first of all, it forces the brain to move away from just using sugar as an energy source and start using byproducts of fat as an energy source, right? So it activates these genes and pathways that have probably been turned off for the majority of someone's life.
Is
And
that ketosis you're talking about? If we start to use energy from our fat, isn't that the process of ketosis?
yeah. So ketogenesis is activated, and the brain start relying about 50-50 on ketone bodies and glucose. And so in that process, though, we suspect, as we see everywhere else in the body, is that autophagy, so the process of clearing up junk within the cells, is activated, and possibly also clearing bad cells. And then really lots of the benefits occur when you go back to the normal food, right? They don't really occur. So fasting itself, it could be viewed as a good and bad thing, right? So in some sense, it gets rid of junk, but it gets rid of also of a lot of components, right? And the refeeding then has the job of rebuilding. You put it back together now in a way that is better functional, more functional, and working better than the original cell.
So now what you've created something called the fasting mimicking diet, and you told us earlier that you every few months, like maybe 3 times a year, it's a good thing to do for maybe 5 days. Tell us a little bit about what your research has indicated, because the reason why we wanted to come to you is because you have a lot of data points your research behind what fast inside our body. So just give us an indication as to, first of all, why is it called the mimicking diet? I assume because we're not starving ourselves completely. We're allowed a little bit of liquid or food. And secondly, what you saw in your research as to what the effects were with that time period.
Yeah, so it's a fasting mimicking diet because water-only fasting is good and bad. And water-only fasting can cause hypoglycemia, can cause low blood glucose levels, low blood pressure. Lots of people, there are concerns about them passing out, etc. So the fasting mimicking diet is basically using our what we call Nutri technology, or understanding, for example, the connection between proteins and amino acids and TOR, a gene that responds to high levels of amino acids, or the connection between sugar and protein kinase A, PKA. So we basically first understood the molecular biology, and then say, well, what if we trick the system into thinking or responding as if it was just receiving water? So we can now provide maybe about 50% of the normal level of calories, but the system really detects it as a water-only fasting. So everything changes according to a water-only fast. So in some ways, we remove all or the majority of the issues. We also remove lots of the burden of having to do water-only fasting, which is extremely difficult for people. And then, but then we keep maintaining the effects.
So we have questions from our viewers about applying this to dementia patients. A lot of the questions ask if we, in fact, can apply. If someone already has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or a type of dementia, will this help them?
Well, the answer, we don't know. So we have done it in mice, and in mice, clearly we've done multiple fasting mimicking diets, and it helps against cognitive decline. So the mice can remember better, are much more, they can learn better, and can remember better. Now we've done, soon enough, we're going to be publishing some data on humans that don't have dementia. And now in a month or so, we'll start a clinical trial, randomized clinical trial in Italy, at one of the largest hospitals called San Martino Hospital in Genova, Italy. And that's going to be on Alzheimer, early Alzheimer and mild cognitive impairment. And so we'll see. I mean, obviously, we are, we're hopeful. And I think the great advantage of the fasting mimicking diet compared to the drug type of intervention for Alzheimer is that it just revolutionizes the metabolism of the brain, right? And so we're basically saying, well, lots of the targeted approaches have now worked for Alzheimer. Maybe there is something that is much more wide acting, much more programmed, and much more evolved as a process, right? Has a better chance. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but certainly has a better chance of achieving this reset of the brain, which we're already seeing somewhat in mice.
So when you the mice, did the fasting actually help the process, the microglia, which are known as the janitors of our brains, clear out some of the plaques or something that's already, the toxins that already exist? Or when you say reset in the brain, what exactly did the research show in terms of the positive impact in mice?
The original study was done with a high calorie. Now we're doing the one with the different fasting mimicking diet. But the original one showed it was a normal calorie diet, right? And it showed that beta amyloid, the plaques were not affected, but tau phosphorylation was affected, meaning that seems like the previous diet that we used was interfering, it was blocking the negative effects of the plaques on the neurons. Now we're doing multiple mouse models for Alzheimer using the fasting mimicking diet. We're using more a version that is closer to the human version, and we'll see. And of course, we're starting the human trial, so I think we'll see what happens. But mouse is a mouse, and now I think within a year we're going to start having some of the preliminary data on people, and that's really going to be the challenge.
So with that human trial, how many people will you have, and how long will it last before you actually know that there is an impact?
I think, I don't remember the exact number. I think it was 80, 40 and 40. 40 are going to be on a control placebo diet, and 40 are going to be on the fasting mimicking diet. I think within a year of enrolling the last person, they have to do 3 cycles. So that's a process lasting about 6 months. Then so we probably about a year and a half from now we should have the initial data. Now, people, we've always said the same thing, which is the following. First of all, the fasting mimicking diet are low-calorie diets, and we're not really recommending them for people that are older than 70 or so, which cuts out.
I'm sorry, older than, did you say 70?
Yeah.
You bleeped out for a sec.
Yeah.
70.
Older than 70, yes. And so, but now we're developing fasting mimicking diets that are for Alzheimer, that are higher calorie, and so that we believe that, that are suitable for the clinical trial, and then hopefully also suitable for the people out there. And but we always say, if you reach the point that you can't wait and you wanna consider this, you should talk to the neurologist. And of course, lots of neurologists are going to say, no, you're going to have to wait until the end of the clinical trials, which is fair. But again, lots of people cannot wait. And so the question is, the neurologist and a dietitian can make the decision that, this patient could try this because the patient is running out of option. It's a difficult decision, but we've seen it made in many, many occasions with cancer patients, with diabetes patients, with multiple sclerosis patients. So I think it's also reasonable to consider it, if nothing else, for Alzheimer or for cognitive problems. Again, should be done like a clinical trial. So the doctor and the dietitian should handle it as if it was a clinical trial.
Okay, and we have a question coming in right now from one of our viewers saying, how can people implement this diet in their day-to-day life? What does it look like?
Well, day-to-day is not, there is no day-to-day, meaning that this is, there's a company that sells a kit. I don't have any financial gain from it. But I did. I'm the founder of the company, and I did it. And the product is called Prolon, and I did it to get the product out there to people. Although all the income is going to go to charity, and so people can get Prolon, and the Prolon is a box and it contains all the food that someone will consume for 5 days, and that's it. They have to go through a questionnaire, which either sends them to a dietitian or to a doctor. If they don't want to go to an additional dietitian, then they just do it. I think there's a phone call with a dietitian that works for the company. It tells them what to watch for. That's it. They get the box at home. They stop everything else they're eating. They just drink water plus what's in the box for 5 days. And this can be done, between once a month to once every 6 months. So if somebody's very healthy, they probably only need to do it once every 6 months.
Okay. So another question. Do you? Well, I guess one of our viewers is asking, do you have any data published on the effects of the fasting mimicking diet with individuals in age groups, so in their 50s, 60s, and well, you've already addressed the 70 plus. But is it necessary to really look at people in respect to their different age group and fasting? I mean, you said you wouldn't recommend it for 70 or over, but how about everyone under that? Is there a different pattern people should abide by if they are younger versus older?
Well, every person is different, right? Meaning, so somebody could have diabetes, type 1, type 2. So everybody should be handled differently. But in general, in the clinical trial, we had from 20 to 70, 100 subjects. We did not see any problem for any of them. And then about 70,000 people have now done the prolonged fasting mimicking diet. And now we're collecting surveys on about 2,000 people from about 100 doctors, 150 doctors. So thus far, we haven't really seen problems either reported by patients or reported by doctors on these 60, 70,000 people. So it looks like a pretty good safety record. And it doesn't seem to be a problem in the 20 to 70 range. Now, after 70, yes, we publish on protein intake too low being problematic, and we also suspect that if you're 85 and you do too frequently, I mean, most 85-year-olds, they probably did a fasting mimicking diet once in a while, they'd be fine. But I think there should be a geriatrician involved, and the geriatrician will have to make the decision. Yes, this person should do it, and they have to really have reasons for that person to do it, and which should be motivated by the geriatrician.
Okay, and another question has just come in saying, you correctly state that refeeding after a fast is critically important. What is the nature and duration of refeeding that will facilitate the brain not going right back on the path towards cognitive impairment that it was on before the fasting mimicking diet? So how do we make these long-lasting how does fasting translate into a long-lasting impact rather than just, oh, I feel so much clearer now in the moment?
Well, I mean, we've very clearly shown that in the mouse trials and in the mouse studies and in the clinical trials. We've also done one on multiple sclerosis, and we, not a big number of patients, but there was, I think, 48 patients. So the effects are long-lasting. In the normal subjects, we saw about 60% of the effects there after 90 days after the last cycle. So 3 months after the last cycle, the majority of the effects were still there. And of course, they're going to slowly go away. And the worst is your diet and your exercise and everything else. And probably the more quickly it's going to go away. And so some of the general rules that we present are, if somebody's obese, has high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high fasting glucose, they probably need to do it once a month. If somebody who's a 35-year-old athlete in perfect shape and has a pescatarian diet and it's low protein but high nourishment, etc., they might need to do it twice a year. So those are the usual the general guidelines that we give. But then each patient, each person should really probably talk to either a dietitian or a doctor at least once when they get started, and make sure that there is not some reasons why they shouldn't do it, or they should do it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do want to stress to our viewers that, this is, we're looking at the science behind this, but before you partake in anything like this, it is necessary to talk to your own doctor to make sure, as Valter pointed out, everyone is different. We all have different problems, different states of health. And so really check with your own doctor before you decide that this is the right path for you. Someone else has written to us saying, what exactly, you were talking about the fasting mimicking diet and a company that has made the diet where you're drinking, I believe you drink fluids, and there's packets in there, but they want to know what exactly is inside the box. Like, what's the nutrition that you can have while fasting?
Yeah, well, first of all, my book has all the details. It's called The Longevity Diet by Random House. And also the income from that goes to my foundation called Create Cures Foundation, so we can continue to do this type of work. What's in the diet? It's olives, walnuts, hazelnuts. It's kale, chips. It's soups that go from tomato soup to broccoli soup, etc. I mean, we try to make it as, it's a vegan diet. It's 5 days of a vegan diet, but it's very special. I mean, it's quite complex. It took us years and years, even after we knew what ingredients we wanted to do, to put in there. It took us years to get the people, the companies, the factories to make it correctly. So we make it look simple, but it's not as simple as it looks. Even a tomato soup is completely revolutionized to serve its purpose.
Do you, how often do you, I'm assuming you fast, how often do you fast?
Well, I, for example, when I tend to gain weight, as I described in the book, I don't eat lunch. Like today, I didn't have lunch. So that's my typical, so I eat within 12 hours. I don't have lunch if I tend to gain weight. And then, the fasting mimicking diet, because of I have an ideal diet and exercise regimen, I do it twice a year.
So are there benefits then? Have you studied perhaps the benefits of if we just take 12-hour fasts or, maybe 15-hour fasts? Is there benefit to doing really short spurts of fasting?
Yeah, I always say, I don't call that fasting, I call that eating, right? So 12 hours is great. It's what people have always done, and that's what people should do. If you look at centenarians and everybody else, 12 hours is good. Eat for 12 hours, fast for 12 hours. That's a normal eating pattern. Now, when you get to 16 hours, there are clearly benefits, right? That you're probably going to lose weight, etc. There are also problems. For example, gallstone formation, it goes way up for people that fast regularly for 16 or more hours. And of course, the consequence is also the removal of the gallbladder. And that's one problem. Another one is for people that skip breakfast is increased overall mortality, increased cardiovascular mortality. I would not go 16 hours unless for some reason you have to go 16 hours. And I would stick with 12 hours. And these are very, very different fasting regimen than what we're talking about. It takes about 2 to 3 days for the brain to switch and for most of the body to switch into a ketogenic mode. And it takes probably 2 or 3 days to even begin to break down all these components. So by day 5, I would say it's a minimum time needed to do a full reset. And then the refeeding is really going to have the opportunity to rebuild all these things that have been broken down.
Valter, on this series of talks, we've discussed the role of ketones. Why not just supplement ketones instead of fasting? Like, what if you take ketones as a supplement?
Yeah, I think this is a Silicon Valley bad idea. And it seems like lots of these ideas come from Silicon Valley. And this idea of hacking everything, and well, is a problem, right? I always say, imagine that you have a hybrid car, and the hybrid car is really engineered to either work on electricity or on gas, right? And all of a sudden, you find a way to tweak it and to make it work on both at the same time, right? Well, unless you re-engineer the car to do that, most likely, eventually the car is going to break down. And that's exactly what having ketone bodies in addition to the regular food is going to do. Is going to push the body on one side to go into a ketogenesis mode, but it's still going to be fully nourished to burn sugar. And that's why I think it's a bad idea. And in the book, I always talk about 5 pillars. So if you look around the world, the people that have taken ketone bodies as a supplement, it never happened, right? And never happened. And so also, if you look at around the world for people that have a continuous high fat diet, they're not long lived. All the people around the world that have record longevity are on a high carbohydrate diet. They're not on a high sugar diet or a high starch diet. They're on a high carbohydrate diet, right? So they seem to eat lots of vegetables and lots of healthy foods that contain carbohydrates. They don't have so much fats. Some of them have very little fats, like the Okinawans. Some of them have about 30% fats, like the Greeks and the Southern Italians. So either way is fine. Whether you have the fats or you don't. But as long as they're good fats, olive oil, nuts, etc., salmon, those seem to be perfectly fine. But yeah, so in general, trying to hack your way to health, not right now and not for the next 20 years, I would say. But eventually, yes, probably going to be so sophisticated that we'll be able to do it. But it's not just by drinking ketone bodies.
Yeah, much more research, I guess, has to go in that area. We have another viewer who's asking if you have applied your research to the proton diet, what we were talking about, the fasting mimicking diet, specifically to the proton program. Has your research studied that, and is there a published study related to that specific diet?
I'm not familiar with the proton program.
Sorry, the Prolon. Your Prolon, sorry.
Yeah. Well, Prolon is being studied in the clinical trial that was published last year. And Prolon, there was the human trial with 100 subjects, and that showed a reduction in cholesterol, blood pressure, triglycerides, IGF-1, fasting glucose, etc. It was particularly nice because it showed a differential effect, meaning that people that had very low blood sugar, for example, it didn't drop any lower, and that's good, right? Differently from, for example, chronic calorie restriction. If you do chronic calorie restriction, even if you start with low glucose, it'll drop even further, and that's not a good thing, right? So the trial really showed that Prolon has these differential effects, and we think it's because it fixes what's not working. But if it's already working and your sugar levels are normal, it doesn't have to fix anything, and so that's why you don't really see a change.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Longo, for this really informative interview. We really look forward to your published study once you test the fasting mimicking diet on people who have a mild cognitive impairment or early stage Alzheimer's disease, to find out if there is indeed an impact, if it helps people who have already had a diagnosis. So please do keep us posted with that human study. We'd love to learn more once you have the results.
Yeah, sounds good, and I will.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any more questions for Dr. Longo, please post them on this Facebook post, and we will be sure to get answers that perhaps we didn't have time to address during this interview. Thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you all the luck on your future studies.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.